It is Saturday afternoon somewhere in the Great Lakes area. My name is Jim Comparoni, publisher, SpartanMAG.com. Come on in, gather around, gather around, gather around. Great to have uh, everybody tuning in, watching Spartan Mag live from a remote location. Not It's usually in East Lansing, Michigan. Not today. Wanted to have Spartan Mag live earlier this week, but I was on the road, didn't get a chance to do it. Been busy with some things and doing it from a remote location. Today, wanted to do this a couple of weeks ago, able to do it now. We wanted to get a Spartan Mag live out there prior to Big Ten Media Days, which will be on Wednesday in Indianapolis. And before we head down there to cover that, we wanted to get a Spartan Mag live up and running. You guys know I'm a Great Lakes guy. I've seen a couple of Great Lakes here in the last couple of weeks. This one's an underrated one, but still, Lake Michigan is still number one on our Great Lakes. Power Pole replaced Lake Huron. Lake Huron was number one for about 5 years. Lake Michigan jumped in front last fall, but this one right here, it's up there as well. Anyway, you might see those are Canadian flags, and that is a Michigan State flag beneath the Canadian flag over there. We are directly across. We are in Ontario, and directly across from Ohio, Sandusky, Cedar Point is about 35 miles. By the way, the crow flies right across the lake. Southeast Michigan's over that way. Detroit's about that way from where we are right now, about a 30-minute drive from here. So anyway, from the north coast of Lake Erie, glad to have you with us. Got about 3 questions. It's going to be 3 and out. We're not doing our usual 15 questions, 3-hour marathon session. 3 quick questions. One of those I'm going to be expanding in a long way. Because it's a Saturday afternoon, we're not going to have many live viewers, so we're not anticipating a lot of comments in the comment section, but most of you will be watching. It'll come across your YouTube feed. You'll be watching it on a delayed broadcast, and we hope you're liking that. But if there are some questions that come up in the comments area, we will be entertaining those. We're not expecting a lot because nobody's watching YouTube on a Saturday afternoon, right? Unless those of you that are in the deep south where it's really brutally hot. But anyway, Tuesday, Paul Konerdijk and I will be traveling down to Indianapolis for Big Ten Media Days. The Michigan State representatives, of course, Jonathan Smith will be there. It will be intriguing to see what he has to say. Also, Jack Velling, the transfer tight end from Oregon State, he will be there. Arguably the most proven player on the roster coming in from Oregon State. Nathan Carter, underrated running back, Michigan State. He'll be in Indianapolis as well. And Dylan Tatum, safety nickel. He moved from corner, increasingly becoming one of the voices and one of the faces of the program. So those 3 will be interesting. Dylan Tatum's also in really good, thoughtful interviews, so we look forward to seeing Dylan Tatum down there. All right, questions. Question number 1, we'll get right to it. Brandon from Fraser, Michigan asks, can you break down, in your opinion, how the new coaches are doing and the changes in their approach? Now, let me check here. Yeah, the audio is going through this and not the laptop. All right. He says, can you break down, in your opinion, of how the new Michigan State coaches are doing and the changes in their approach to the previous coaching staff? That's a really interesting question. Something I've been asked a lot, to compare the new coaching staff stylistically, personalities, approach to the game, all those things compared to the previous staff. A natural question to ask. We still need to see how things translate to the football field, of course. So everything right now is based on what they look like at Oregon State and some of the other stops, other coaches coming in from other coaching staffs, and what we've seen from them recruiting-wise since December into the spring, and what we saw during the spring showcase, spring game, and how they operate at their camp. Now those things are not obviously not the same as coaching in September, October, November, but we've gotten a feel for them in a sense. But I've covered a lot of coaching staffs that you really don't know until you get into the season, and in that case, you don't know until you get into season 2, season 3, season 4, season 5, and those type of things. But we're able to make some general observations, and I'll be talking about that in a moment. So Brandon from Fraser asks, who have you heard is doing the best job of the assistants so far? What area will you likely see the biggest upgrade from a coaching standpoint? All right, great question. We'll be diving into this. This is a lengthy question. This is kind of an essay question. And going coach by coach from what we've seen so far, I'll start with the offensive line. Jim Mahalchik, the new offensive line coach, very well respected in the coaching industry. Did a great job at Oregon State. Very physical offensive line. varied in their approach to blocking and various run schemes. Hard to get a beat on exactly what they're doing from down to down. If you go back and watch Oregon State games, which I've done. However, they still have their bread and butter where they're going to do this, and you know it's coming, and good luck trying to stop it. And once you load up to stop it, Lindgren, the offensive line coach, they do a good job of getting you leaning one way and countering the other way. So it's a very thoughtful approach with physicality sewn in. Mahalchik, his offensive line last year at Oregon State, they were a finalist for the offensive line of the year. What was it? This is the Mal Moore Award. I can't remember what it's called. Mal Moore is a former athletic director at Alabama. Alabama won it because of the Jim Moore Award. I don't know. Whatever it's called, it's a new award they've been giving out the last 5 or 6 years to the top offensive line of the country. Oregon State was a finalist for that, but they did not win it this year or the year before. But Mahalchik is really well respected in coaching circles, and if you watch him, you can see why. Now, it's not going to be an instantaneous level of improvement there. It's going to take a while. And one of the quotes that Mahalchik had from the spring is, if you're going to do a lot of things, it takes a while to get it founded and grounded and up and running. It takes a while. Now, he didn't say they won't get it all done in year number 1, but you'll have to be. I would anticipate have to be patient. I think the offensive line, there's a lot of unproven players in the starting unit, a lot of young players in the second string. So from a personnel standpoint, it's going to take a long time in terms of getting these players into the correct muscle memory to where they can operate with quickness and physicality. It's going to take more than one season. But Mahalchik comes in with a great reputation. I've been impressed with him. He's no nonsense, keeps things close to the vest, which I respect also. It's going to take a while, but physicality's back in town. And that offensive line is going to have a lot to do with it. He inherited a lot of players. We'll have to wait and see how if some of those players make improvement in year number 1. Like Brandon Baldwin's been a functional left tackle. Now, can he become better with new weight training, new strength coach, new offensive coordinator, new offensive line coach? Very interesting to see what happens there. So Mahalchik, Kapilovic, I thought Kapilovic, he came in with a great reputation as well. Came in from Colorado, and after the 2021 season, Kapilovic was offered a job at USC. So Lincoln Riley thought highly of him. He's not retained by Jonathan Smith, so he becomes available and gets hired by Kalen DeBoer at Alabama. So Alabama, money's no object there. They can hire almost whoever they want from an assistant coach point of view. So Kapilovic still has a strong reputation in coaching circles, although he never got the offensive line really rolling here the way he wanted to. He recruited very aggressively, and he was happy with a lot of the players that he brought in, Kapilovic, but just they were never quite able to really get the ground game going like he wanted to. Maybe he'll do a better job out there now that he's with DeBoer. DeBoer, of course, one of the great hot commodities as a head coach. That's why he got the job at Alabama. Great offensive coach at Washington. Michigan State fans are well aware of how good DeBoer was and how strong Washington was on offense. DeBoer is a great coach. So DeBoer thought enough of Kapilovic to hire him at Alabama. That says a lot about Kapilovic. But Michigan State fans know that it never quite got off the ground. Now, in terms of recruiting already at Alabama, Kapilovic was able to retain Caden Proctor at Alabama. They also brought in, of course, Gino Vandermark from Michigan State, whom Kapilovic recruited to Michigan State. Vandermark went through spring practice and then transferred to Alabama. And I've heard from insiders that, Vandermark was pretty emotional about leaving. He told people on the team and people on the staff, hey, you guys are going to get it going. I know you're going to be great up here. I hate to leave, didn't really want to leave, but went with Kapilovic to Alabama. I don't know if there was a strong NIL deal involved. It probably was. I don't know. But Vandermark, so Kapilovic brings Vandermark with him. He also interestingly brought in to Alabama Parker Brailsford, who was an offensive lineman from Scottsdale, Arizona. He recruited him to Michigan State, did not get him. He signed with Washington, and he was at Washington for a year or so. And he goes with DeBoer to Alabama with Kapilovic there, so that was kind of a natural. And they got another offensive lineman from the portal out of A&M that I don't know a lot about. But Kapilovic, he went with Brailsford, a guy he missed out on. He went with Vandermark, a guy he coached at Michigan State. So Kapilovic's still going to be Kapilovic, and we'll see whether that meshes better with DeBoer. Mahalchik, what he did at Oregon State was more impressive than what Kapilovic did at Michigan State or Colorado. I never went back and watched film of what Kapilovic did at North Carolina. I know they had 2 1,000-yard rushers there when Fedora was head coach. So Kapilovic had a strong reputation, and deservedly so, but Michigan State fans never really saw that demonstrated with the green and white uniform. Over the course of time, maybe it would have happened, but it never quite happened. So both of those guys are heavyweight offensive line coaches, reputation-wise in the industry. Michalczyk has had more proven, has demonstrated more success in recent years at Oregon State. So similar in a lot of ways. I think Michalczyk might be more varied with the approach in some regards, but I was always a proponent of Kapilovic. I've said it 8 times already on this VCast. I don't want to be redundant, although I am, but never quite got it established. But I don't close the door on Kapilovic becoming a good offensive line coach at Alabama, and I think Michalczyk is a great one coming into Michigan State, but it's not going to be overnight. All right, at the other positions, Jay Johnson was the quarterback's coach for the previous staff. Brian Lindgren is pretty much the quarterback's coach now as offensive coordinator. Also, of course, Jonathan Smith, head coach, is the former quarterback, and I'll talk more about Jonathan Smith in a moment. But Jay Johnson, becomes available and is now offensive coordinator at Wyoming. Wasn't the most, highly sought after offensive coordinator in the industry when he was coming around, when he was available. So Johnson, had his struggles at Michigan State as well, and was okay at Colorado. Was an analyst, I think, at Georgia. Was a coordinator, I think, at Minnesota under Jerry Kill. At Michigan State, we saw him for 4 years. They had the really good year in 2021 with Kenneth Walker. They did a great job utilizing him, of course. But I don't want to be too critical of Jay Johnson, but it just seemed kind of a it was your basic, I don't want to say run-of-the-mill offense, but it was, I don't think opposing defensive coordinators were lying awake at night worried about how Michigan State was going to hit them with Johnson. Now with Lindgren, something I'll say about Lindgren, and I've quoted Demetrius Martin on this in the past. I thought it was a really interesting, strong quote, and I've said it before, and I'll repeat it again. Demetrius Martin, Michigan State's new cornerbacks coach, was a defensive backs coach at various stops of the Pac-12, coached against Jonathan Smith when he was at Arizona and Arizona State and UCLA and Oregon. And now he's on Smith's staff, and he's known Smith. They're both from Pasadena. They've known each other for years. Smith, I think, recruited Demetrius Martin's brother years ago. So now Smith brings him to the Michigan State staff. Demetrius Martin, a Michigan State graduate from 1994, is back in town for the first time in 30 years. And Martin says, hey, when we coached against Smith, we had to defend every blade of grass on the field. He really... he said it was a handful as a defensive coach to get ready for Oregon State's teams. And if you're a casual fan and you watched Oregon State in the past, they might have looked kind of ordinary in some ways, and they're old school in a lot of ways, because they will huddle. And sometimes they'll go with 2 backs, and they're under center, which is kind of it was a rare thing in recent years, but now we've seen Michigan do more of that. Georgia's done it. So in some ways they might look like Iowa, but then they hit you with a more varied attack and more layers to the onion with the way they do it. They get you worried about 2 backs, and they'll go 2 backs a little bit, but they're primarily 1 back and 2 tight ends. But they might spread the 2 tight ends out and motion running back out, and they're empty. They make a defense make a choice whether they want to load up to stop the run, and if they do, all those guys are pretty flexible. So then they'll go to the air, and they don't just go to the air; they'll go deep on you. And so I've compared it to the way Michigan played the last 2 years, with the physicality component. They'll get under center, they'll get in a phone booth, they'll try to knock you off the ball, but then they will also get you leaning one way and play action the other way, and take advantage and break their tendencies in a way that I think, it's compared to Shanahan football, West Coast football, a lot of zone, a lot of wide zone, outside zone, inside zone. But they'll go duo just like everybody else, and I'm pretty sure I'm seeing some man-to-man blocking on that as well. I need to ask Mahalchik, if I'm seeing that right. There's a lot of layers of the onion. They are varied. It's state of the art under center type of football for college football right now. But like I said, from the outside looking in, it might look like something. Some of it might look like it's from the '70s, but they do a lot of studying of the NFL and the Shanahan lineage of football, and it's interesting. And some they'll huddle, but sometimes they'll be in a huddle and they'll sprint to the line of scrimmage, and and because they will go power formation on you, or they will spread out and take deep shots. The defense has a short amount of time to identify who's where and what the threats are. And when they sprint out of that huddle, they're snapping the ball quickly. It creates the same. That's what they did at Oregon State. I don't know if they'll do it exactly the same here, but I would imagine you'll see it at Michigan State. It creates the effect like an up-tempo offense. The difference is it's not necessarily up-tempo to get you tired. It's up-tempo that they're going to get the playoff before you're set. And because they'll do everything from A to Z on offense and sprint out of the huddle, and they'll get it snapped in a hurry, and they just catch you off balance. And a lot of the things that I guess I'm getting into the Jonathan Smith portion of it right now. You'll hear other people talk about that Jonathan Smith is always a few steps ahead of you, and that's something I've heard over and over. Heard that from Demetrius Martin. Heard that, I think, from Aiden Childs. His dad was interviewed last week during a camp that Aiden Childs was a part of here in the Detroit area, not far from here. And you hear that from a lot of people. Jonathan Smith is always a few steps ahead of you, and that's part of being a former quarterback, and not just a quarterback, but a very cerebral type of quarterback. Former walk-on, smallish guy, kind of worked his way up at Oregon State. And I heard a quote from, I think, Mike Riley, who was Jonathan Smith's initial coach initially at Oregon State. Mike Riley was the head coach when Jonathan Smith was recruited as a walk-on out of Pasadena. And Riley said that that when he began showing interest in Jonathan Smith, and to quote Mike Riley, he said he wanted to talk to the quarterback of this team, whatever high school Jonathan Smith played at. And the head coach of the high school brought Jonathan Smith over, and to quote Mike Riley, Riley said, he brought this little kid over to talk to me. That's how he described Jonathan Smith. This is circa 1996. And he described Jonathan Smith as a little kid. So he's a little guy that just had a pretty good arm and a great mind for the game. That's what I'm getting at. And Riley said even at that moment when Jonathan Smith was beginning to be recruited as a walk-on, Jonathan Smith, I don't know if Jonathan Smith told Riley this, or if Jonathan Smith's high school coach told Riley this, but they said Jonathan Smith wants to be a coach, like a college football coach someday. This is Jonathan Smith, prior to his senior year in high school, I think. So he's always been wired that way. Not unlike Harbaugh in a lot of ways. Now, Harbaugh, of course, everybody knows has a sinister side to him. And if you're a Michigan State fan, you're really bothered by him. But think about the difference between Jim Harbaugh and John Harbaugh. John Harbaugh, the brother in the NFL, different personality, right? So you can be a good twin and an evil twin. Smith, I think, would be kind of more of the John Harbaugh type of personality, but the outlook on football, I think it's similar to Jim Harbaugh in some ways. I won't get into the other ways. I've been critical of Harbaugh enough over the years, in some ways off the field, but no question about it, he put together a real good football team the last 2 years. So, in Lindgren, part of the Jonathan Smith system, Lindgren, I think, is a young, potentially an upcoming star as an offensive coach in the sport of football. I'll be interested to see how he develops at Michigan State. Younger guy, impressive, impressive when he walks in the room type of guy. Not full of himself, but that he just comes across as he knows what he wants to do, and he's got great optimism that they can get things established. And Lindgren is really an intriguing offensive coordinator for Michigan State, the likes of which we've not seen around Michigan State over the years. Now, D'Antonio had all kinds of success, with Treadwell and some other offensive coordinators. Jonathan Smith had Dave Baldwin, who I had a lot of respect for. Baldwin did a few things really well, and I hope he's doing well wherever he is in this stage of his life. I liked him a lot. Morris Watts was offensive coordinator for a long time at Michigan State and had little spats of success here and there, but it was also like the man a lot, but he was a part of, I don't know, maybe 5 coaching staffs that became fired. It's Perlis, Bobby Williams, Jerry DiNardo. There's a few others. Was he with Jackie Sherrill? I don't remember. Sherrill didn't get fired at A&M. He was with Dan Enos at Central Michigan. Loved Dan Enos, but that was starting to get a little bit sideways because they had high standards there at the time. But anyway, Watts, Lindgren's a different breath of fresh air compared to a lot of those guys. So Lindgren's, I'm intrigued to watch him and cover him as a sports writer and your correspondent in East Lansing. It's going to be interesting to watch Lindgren. But nothing against Jay Johnson, but I think Lindgren is a really intriguing upgrade at offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach. And Johnson was overseeing the quarterbacks, but you have now and Mel Tucker was head coach who was hands off when it came to quarterbacks, other than trying to get them fired up and motivated and deciding who the starter was and those type of things. But Jonathan Smith, former quarterback, that's his main. That's his area of expertise. And at practice, I watch Jonathan Smith, and he's in the middle of the field with the quarterbacks. That's what he does. I mean, I used to watch Saban, used to watch D'Antonio, and of course, mainly they were with defensive backs and safeties. That's what they do. That's their area of expertise. Bobby Williams would roam around. John L. Smith would roam around. John L. Smith was a defensive lineman. No, John L. Smith was a quarterback in college, but he was a D-line coach initially, so he was kind of all over the field. I like John L. Smith in a lot of ways too. He was good when he had a good staff. He had a good staff at Louisville. When he came to Michigan State, he lost some of that coaching talent, including Bobby Petrino. And as he lost coaches, his level of success waned as well. But just watching the old John L. Smith on the field, he was with the quarterbacks a little bit too. But Jonathan Smith is with the quarterbacks a lot, and he's on the field and he's watching closely. And from what I can tell, he's pretty measured with his comments. He's kind of quiet out there. But he's overseeing the quarterback situation with Lindgren. So the combination of Jonathan Smith and Brian Lindgren compared to Jay Johnson, I think it's an upgrade. Nothing against Jay Johnson. I just think that there's a lot of star power there with Jonathan Smith and Brian Lindgren. Running backs coach Keith Bonifant coming in. He's got a really good reputation with running backs that he's coached, including Martinez last year at Oregon State. Supposed to be a good recruiter. He's been involved with recruiting in the Detroit area. He's replacing Ephraim Reed, who was a really good coach with roots in Louisiana. I was always really impressed with Ephraim Reed and how he did in press conferences and on the recruiting trail and so forth. And I can't remember where Ephraim Reed was hired. I should have researched that before I began this podcast. But I'm impressed with Ephraim Reed, and he's going to do well. He's going to be. I expect Ephraim Reed to be a good running backs coach somewhere in the SEC pretty soon. Bonifant's got a big reputation coming in from the West Coast. Similar, I'd say Bonifant and Reed are similar. Bonifant's getting into new recruiting territory. Give him a couple years, and I suspect that he will make some strong contacts in Detroit and elsewhere. That one's kind of a push. A couple of good young coaches. Bonifant's more established. I think Reed's got a great future. Wide receiver coach, it's the same coach. Courtney Hawkins retained at wide receivers coach. And I think that with the new staff, I think he's newly motivated recruiting-wise. And, and in the future, we're going to see how Courtney Hawkins has done in terms of his evaluation, because some of the wide receivers in the program right now we're not necessarily highly ranked recruits, but we're evaluation guys, developmental guys. So we'll see how those guys do. Isaiah Johnson and Jalen Smith, and they got this Taplin kid from Texas. I'm impressed with him. He committed as a no-star. I watch him. He's 6'1", but he plays bigger than that. He's a long strider, can cut on one foot, high-pointed, all the things. I look at him, I'm like, man, if this guy played for Belleville, he'd be a 4-star in the state of Michigan. Maybe sometimes talent gets lost in the state of Texas a little bit here and there. I don't know. But those developmental evaluation guys that Hawkins has gotten in the last couple of years, it's going to be interesting to see how those guys develop and as they ease into the playing group. Tight ends coach Brian Wozniak coming in. Recruiting coordinator as well, young coach, was out at Oregon State with these guys. Ohio native, which is important for this staff. Recruiting coordinator, a guy that's very recruiting oriented, and for him to have the Ohio roots, I think is great for this program at this particular time. Young guy, motivated, just had a newborn. I think he has 3 or 4 kids now. Young family. Loves football, or as they say, loves ball, loves coming out and coaching. I think Wozniak is a great energy guy, bright guy, Ohio guy, program guy. Now, where was he? Michigan State recruited him, and he talked about he remembers being in D'Antonio's office when Michigan State recruited him, but Michigan State ended up signing Deion Sims out of Orchard Lake, St. Mary's, and Sims had a really good career, went on and played in the NFL. And Wozniak says, so they ended up with Deion Sims, who turned out to be pretty good, and he says that kind of in a deadpan. So Wozniak ended up going to Wisconsin, and great thing about that is if you're going to be a tight end at Wisconsin, big, heavy emphasis on blocking, right? So he's got that Wisconsin Badger tight end blocking background. Comes into Michigan State where blocking has not been great at the tight end position for a few years. So Wozniak, he's straight out of central casting, in my opinion. If you were going to look for a tight ends coach at Michigan State University right now and you looked at people who are available to be a coach at tight end, Wozniak would be perfect. He knows Michigan State a little bit. He knows Ohio recruiting. He's got great energy. And they didn't have to go get him from elsewhere. He was with them at Oregon State. And at Oregon State, tight end blocking, usage of the tight end is a big part of what they do. Jack Velling, did he lead? I think he led the nation, or he tied for leading the nation last year in touchdowns by a tight end. They really like to look him up in the red zone. And Velling also, and the other tight end they had last year, 83, I forget his name for Oregon State, they'll send those tight ends deep too. A lot of times what they do, we're talking about offensive coordinator and traits and so forth. A lot of times for Oregon State, you'll see them operate in the vacuum a little bit. Not everybody calls it vacuum, but vacuum concepts, that's not what people call it. But it's kind of like dagger concepts. A dagger concept is, you're sending someone deep to take the top off the defense. You hear people talk about that a lot. Sending someone deep, take the top off the defense, and you run and dig underneath it. So you're taking the top of the defense to push deep safeties back. If there's one or two, you're pushing them back and you're hitting them underneath with a dig. That's a dagger concept. It's kind of shaped like a dagger, right? Same type of vacuum concept. They'll send people deep and they'll do like a late release to the tight end, which is really hard to defend. A lot of late release stuff, like decoy stuff this way, and then the late release this way, which is kind of a Harbaugh type of thing. And they're tricky with it as long as pass protection is good. And if it's not great, you can buy time with a play action wide zone here, move the pocket, sprint out, or boot, or half boot. Buy some time for the late release into the vacuum. And so they use the tight ends a lot. In the previous staff with Jay Johnson, they talked about using the tight ends a lot, but that never really got established either. Jay Johnson used to talk about that the tight end position wasn't his opinion, the MVP of the offense, the MVP of his offense, because it's going to be used in blocking and as a threat in the pass game and also check down and all those things. We never really saw a lot of that, but they had former kickers and punters playing tight end, walk-ons there. And they brought in some transfers. There was a kid from Illinois they brought in 2 years ago that had a good night on opening night. And then it's kind of fogged out. Brought in Jalen Franklin from Wisconsin last year. Could block, but that guy had no hands. Nothing against him, but really didn't have hands. Hopner coming in from Boise State made a couple good plays and was lost for the year. He's coming back as a seventh-year senior. I think he's turning 25 in November. 25 years old, and He's 6'3", does not have ideal size, but he made a couple nice catches. He's got good hands, and he's still around. So the tight end, so the previous tight ends coach, Ted Gilmore, they didn't recruit real great consistently at the tight end position. Tried to rely on some walk-on or some transfers, and they were hit and miss, mostly miss. Gilmore, used to coach at Wisconsin and Nebraska. Kind of toward the end of his career, it seems like. Did a good job recruiting Brendan Parachek, coming in from Dexter. Got on the field last year as a true freshman, showed some promise. He's added some mass now. I think Parachek has a good future. But tight end position, for the most part, in recent years, Michigan State kind of missed the mark there. Bring in Wozniak. I like this guy they recruited out of California, Wyatt Hook. I think he's the most underrated player in the incoming recruiting class. 6'5.5", real lengthy catch radius, athletic. He's got to fill into his body. He's a teenager right now, so give him time. But I look at him, he's ranked like number 97 player in California. And like I said on signing day, I'm like, if there are 96 players better than Wyatt Hook in the state of California, then I'm amazed by that. I doubt that there is. Now, that doesn't guarantee he's going to have success at Michigan State. Who knows? Sometimes people come 1,000 miles, 2,000 miles from home, 2,500 miles from home. They get homesick and things just don't work out. I'm just talking about looking at him on film and what they've got to work with. I'm impressed with him. as a tight end recruit. And Michigan State's recruiting real hard at the tight end position right now, the 2025s, 2026s. And there's some good ones here in the state of Michigan, and Wozniak's all over it. Again, nothing against Ted Gilmore, but I think there's a big difference between Ted Gilmore and Brian Wozniak. Really impressed with Wozniak and the potential of the tight end position moving forward here at that position. You go back and you look at what Michigan State was doing at tight end, even in the early stages of the Mel Tucker era. Again, Parachek was a good one in 2023. Jack Nickel was signed in 2022, along with Michael Masunas. Nickel coming in from Georgia, Masunas coming in from Arizona. Nickel was around for a couple of years. We saw him for a couple of springs. Never really made the travel team. Never got on the field in the fall. Went through spring with Jonathan Smith this past spring, and then entered the transfer portal. I didn't hear this from anybody, but the writing on the walls, they didn't necessarily see a great future for him at Michigan State, so he transferred out. Where did he go to? He went to a small school down south somewhere. Was it Georgia State or something like that? Someone in the comment section can look that up and let me know where Nickel goes. So good luck to Jack Nickel. He gave it a good effort. Masunas was a pleasant surprise this spring. He's a guy that was redshirted in 2022, and then last year in 2023 was injured in preseason practice. Got on the field late in the year, had one catch for 1 yard in the last game of the season against Penn State at Ford Field. And we really didn't know much about him. And like Wozniak said, when they were taking over going into winter training, winter football, and into spring practice, they didn't know much about Masunas. Masunas was healthy this spring and was a pleasant surprise from what I heard. He made a couple plays in the second scrimmage. It was a closed scrimmage. I didn't see it, but Masunas made a couple plays there. We saw him in the spring scrimmage. He's still just a redshirt freshman type of guy. I'm not saying he's a difference maker right away, but he's somebody that's in the depth chart on the roster who looks like he's functional at tight end right now and can build from there. So Masunas might end up being a good, solid recruit from the 2022 class at the tight end position. Parachek is good for 2023, it looks like it. 2021, they signed Cam Allen out of Texas. I think he's 21. And nothing against Cam Allen, but he kind of his film was he looked like a wide receiver. He was thin, tall-ish, and was going to be a severe project in terms of becoming a blocker and a real bona fide tight end. And, we talked to his high school coach, and his high school coach basically said that, we asked him, what'd you think about, Mel Tucker and Gilmore and the Michigan State coaches as they recruited Cam Allen. Now, this was during COVID, so there was not a lot of travel. There was no travel going on, but long story short, Michigan State's coaches never talked to him. So I'm just wondering, how do you recruit a guy and not talk to his high school coach? I don't know, but Cam Allen lasted maybe a year or so, and then transfers that because things were kind of tardy at tight end recruiting in 2020 and 2021, they tried to backfill with transfers. Tyneil Hopper coming in from Boise State, Jalen Franklin coming in from Wisconsin, who didn't have hands. I mean, and then there was we'll play, what was it, Nebraska game or Indiana game, where they threw like a seam route to Franklin down the middle of the field, and he was open, but he dropped it. And I remember talking to Konendijk, assistant editor. I'm like, why do you scheme that for him? I mean, we'd seen he just has trouble hanging on to the ball. Nothing against Franklin. I wish him well, but even at pro day, Franklin was out there running routes for scouts, and he just dropping. I mean, he couldn't catch a cold. Wish him well. I don't like to be critical of college kids. I probably shouldn't have said that, but yeah, I mean, I understand why Michigan State was trying to bring in some talent at the tight end position. And Saeed Khalifa knew a little bit about him at Wisconsin, brought him in, and didn't work out, but good kid, blocked well, which they needed. So got on the field and blocked a little bit, but you have to do both. The defense can't know, okay, 83's on the field, he's only a blocker, so you're leaning 80% run as a defense. You got to be able to do everything. Wozniak mentioned that. Lindgren mentioned that. They want to, I think all coaches talk about that, being able to mirror your success. You got to be able to run right as an offense and left. And your tight ends, it's great if they can do everything. And everybody wants to do that. We'll see if Michigan State can make progress toward that. Franklin was not in that category. Brought in Ademola Falei from Norfolk State. When they got him as a transfer, I went back and watched one of Norfolk State's games, watched every snap, and he might have played 15 snaps in that game. He was not a starter. And I'm like, how does Michigan State, this program like Michigan State, bring in someone from Norfolk State as a transfer who didn't even start at Norfolk State. Now, he was also cousins with Samson Okunlola, who was a 5-star offensive lineman from New England who ended up signing with Miami. So maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. But I was like, Filet, he's a tall guy, runs pretty well, looks good in the airport, but has a long way to go. And I said on these podcasts, I'm like, be patient with him. He's not going to help this year. Frankly, I didn't see. He's kind of an interesting frame of reference guy for me, because I look at somebody who's 20 years old, who didn't start at Norfolk State, looks good in the airport, runs well. If he becomes anything, then that will be the Ademola Fileye example, to not shut the door on someone like that. And lo and behold, this spring, he added some weight. He's up to 252. I saw him in practice. Looks like a different guy. I'm not saying he's ready to make an impact now, but he's a completely different player now than he was a year and a half ago. So Fileye, you talk about a transfer project. So, I mean, if you're bringing in transfers, it seems to me you want to bring in guys. Maybe you've recruited them in the past if they're younger guys and you believe in them. Other than that, I would think you would want proven college football players. Previous staff brought in a lot of guys that just didn't play at their previous stop. 20 of them, like every year. Fileye was one of them. I don't know. So, but Fileye, I think he's got a chance. So good for him. Hopper, good for him. And Hopper had a touchdown against Richmond, I think it was. And then he had a touchdown. He had an 11-yarder against Washington. And, they were getting blown out at the time. But credit to him, he really, on that play against Washington, he really, a lot of will and effort on a catch over the middle. I think it was a third down play, and really moved the pile to try to get close to the goal line, and ended up getting injured on that play. I feel bad for him, because he's really giving maximum effort during a blowout loss. So in terms of analyzing somebody's will and heart, Hopper showed it on that play. So he's back. He's an older guy. So maybe he can help with the tight end position as well. But that was just looking back at what's going on in the tight end position in the past, and why they ended up, with walk-on kickers and punters at that position in recent years. And if they hadn't had those guys, I don't know who would have been playing tight end. Talking about Evan Morris last year and the year before that. Tyler Hunt, former punter, Evan Morris, former kicker, playing tight end. Got away with it to an extent on a couple of sub-500 teams, but that tells you where the tight end situation was previously. Now, credit to the previous staff for Masunis and Parachek and Wozniak. I think the tight end position is going to become a strength. This new staff, they really accentuate the use of the tight end position, and I think that position's in really good shape going forward. Even the walk-ons are kind of interesting. They're bringing in Charlie Baker, a guy from East Lansing High School that we watched play basketball and football this year. And, I coached against him in baseball this past spring, and he's a competitor. He's built well, he's athletic, and he's the type of walk-on tight end you want. So, we talked about Morris and Hunt as previously kickers that were tight ends, but tight end is a position at which walk-ons can have an impact. And I know that Michigan State's recruiting well and they've got some decent young players now. They're recruiting well, but I think Baker's the type of guy that can play some football somewhere, and he's going to give it a shot at Michigan State. And I think they're going to be happy to have him in the program. So tight end is going to be an improvement. Defensive line coach, you got Coach Lengy, Sueanoa coming in from Oregon State. I say it over and over. You talk about people that are really respected in the industry. People love this guy out on the West Coast. He opens up a lot of doors out there recruiting-wise that's going to be intriguing. And now, Michigan State's done some defensive line recruiting this year, and they still have some openings. Quite frankly, came in second for a few guys. So I wouldn't be surprised if Michigan State ends up circling back to some guys on the West Coast as we get into senior film and we start watching the recruiting picture. And I think he's got a good chance to uncover some good ones out there. That's going to be interesting to watch moving forward at the defensive line, recruiting-wise. Defensive line at Oregon State, he's going to be meshing into Joe Rossi's system as opposed to the previous system at Oregon State. So he's getting acclimated to a new coaching staff. That's not always the easiest thing to do. So we'll see how that turns out. But it's a net positive for Michigan State at the position compared to what it's been at Michigan State in previous years. Michigan State had 3 different defensive line coaches in the last 3 years. 2021, Ron Burton, ended up kind of getting let go because of some communication situations that went on there. Ended up to Indiana and then was no longer at Indiana. But Burton did a good job for a period of time with the D'Antonio era. Came in, made a splash recruiting wise. Player development evaluation was pretty solid there for a while. And it continued to be pretty solid there beginning of the Tucker era, but it kind of went off the tracks a little bit. He was kind of ushered out. Brought in Marco Coleman, came in from Georgia Tech, and also Brandon B.T. Jordan coming in from unorthodox background. Gave that a shot. They thought that might be good in recruiting and player development. Didn't work out, but I respect the shot they took at that. Of course, B.T. Jordan was with the Seahawks for a year. Then Ohio State. Only lasted at Ohio State for a few months. I'm not sure what happened there, but people might not be surprised that he moved on. But anyway, then Marco Coleman for 1 year. Then he goes back to Georgia Tech. Not sure what went on there. They bring in Deron Reynolds from Stanford. He spends a year. So when you've got a revolving door at defensive line, all these position coaches, they're all developmental positions, especially on the defensive line and offensive line. I guess every position is that way. But D-line, when you're changing coaches, I mean, someone like Maverick Hansen at Michigan State, I mean, you talk about a guy that's been through, and he dates back to the Paleozoic. Maverick Hansen was part of the last football team at Farmington Hills Harrison. They closed the school. Committed to Mark D'Antonio. He's a D'Antonio guy. D'Antonio retires. Pre-pandemic. And then Mel Tucker. Now he's with Jonathan Smith. He's had he's on his fourth defensive line coach. So that guy closed a high school, closed down D'Antonio, went through COVID, and then went through Mel Tucker, 4 different coaches. Maverick Hansen, he's an Ice Age guy. He's seen it all. So, and he's fired up about Coach Lengi Sueanoa. And Ron Burton was good, but you can't do what they did, Burton, Coleman, Reynolds. So just if they can get a level of stability there with Coach Lengi Sueanoa, that's got to be a plus, at least. And I think it can be plus long term if everything checks out and does what I think can happen there. Linebackers coach, Scotty Hazelton was the linebackers coach previously, also defensive coordinator. Joe Rossi is the new defensive coordinator and linebackers coach. And Hazelton came in with a good reputation, had a couple of good years at Kansas State, Legion of Boom guy with the Seahawks. So now is he an analyst somewhere at Texas, right? So he needs to resurrect his coaching career because he was a disaster at Michigan State. They were ranked outside the top 100 in total defense, I think, each of the last 3 years. Didn't work out. I've seen coaches, fail, regroup, and resurrect their careers and end up doing well later on. I think Hazelton's capable of doing that. With his NFL background, I kind of expected him to become an assistant coach in the NFL again. But didn't work out at Michigan State. He'd be the first one to admit that. He's thought highly enough in the industry that Texas has given him a shot there. But I've said this before, but the best way I can describe what happened at Michigan State on defense is I think it just kind of became analysis to paralysis type of situation. And I use some players as examples, and especially the linebacker position. I use a guy like Noah Harvey as an example. Noah Harvey was a linebacker in 2019 as a young guy, I think a freshman. Mark D'Antonio's last year. I think he had double-digit tackles in the Pinstripe Bowl victory over Wake Forest. You can fact check me on that. That seems to be in the back of my mind somewhere. Anyway, he was never going to be Brad Van Pelt, right? But Noah Harvey could play functional college football early in his career. And then in 2020, year one under Mel Tucker, albeit only in 7 games, and they didn't have spring football that year, so the whole program was delayed in getting things installed, so I understand all those asterisks and so forth. But, I mean, Noah Harvey took a step back in 2020. He was pausing and late and just wasn't the same player. They changed schemes. The previous staff with D'Antonio was 1 gapping attack, 1 read go. And I'm not saying 2 gapping is inferior. 2 gapping can be very successful. Iowa did it for years. Saban did it. Alabama, Georgia, Michigan's done it. If you have really, it works out better. Like a lot of schemes do. It works out better when you have great talent. So they went to 2 gapping with Hazelton and Tucker. Tucker wanted to do that, coming from Georgia and Alabama and so forth. May not have had the talent to do it, but when you're 2 gapping, the linebackers have to read and react more and have a knack and just read backfield flow, but it's not just you've got between the guard and tackle, and you're just shooting that gap no matter where it travels. So that's where you get into the analysis to paralysis thing. That's what it looked like to me. This one player, Noah Harvey, bless his heart, was not the same player in year 2 that he was in year 1. Then the next year, I remember talking to him in the spring, and I mentioned these things I just mentioned to you about the difference between being 1 gap and 2 gap, and are you going to be more comfortable this year because of the reads? And he said, no question about it. And he actually said this, and you can go back and find this interview somewhere because it was a Zoom interview. This is when we were coming out of COVID. And he says, it's funny that you ask that because, yeah, it was difficult, feeling right about making those reads when he was the first year in the program as a sophomore in 2020. And as his career went along, he became more and more functional. But that's one player that had trouble with the reading and reacting. Meanwhile, Quavaris Crouch is the guy he played next to for 1 year in 2020. Maybe that was 2021. And Quavaris Crouch had a lot of talent, but he was just kind of on his own recon, it looked like. There were times when there was a gap that was left unhosted, and probably his gap. Other times he's going 100 miles an hour, makes a real explosive play at the sideline. You're like, that's a lot of talent there, and he was a 4-star guy coming from Tennessee. But that's a guy that didn't seem to bother with the analysis, and by the end of the year he was kind of off the team, and then was around town and not on the team, and I'm not sure where he is now. But even someone like Ben Van Sumeren, great respect for Ben Van Sumeren, and I was mildly critical of the way he played in 2022. Athletic guy. Everybody knew he was athletic. You heard about his 40-yard dash time was as good as anybody on the team. And you could see that like on swing passes, flare passes, passes out to the flat. When he could just run and chase it like he did in the opener against Western Michigan, he looked dynamic as an athlete. Other times when there were plays between the tackles, he was downstream and just incorrect a lot. And I was like, gosh, just not, all respect to Ben, just not good enough, right? Even Cal Halliday, he was again, he's never going to beat Carl Banks, but earlier in his career, C gap, press gap, but he didn't play. He didn't play much of the D'Antoni era. He was recruited by D'Antoni, but didn't play for them. But a guy that I think now in the new 1-gapping system with Rossi, I think that you might see him be more active. Not because the previous system was inferior, but the previous system, I think there was some analysis to paralysis going on. Ben Van Sumeren does great in pro day. Vertical jumps 40, gets drafted by the Eagles as a developmental guy. Like, man, the guy looks like $1 million. He's got all these measurables. Let's bring him in, see if we can teach him to be something. Makes the taxi squad, I think, practice team. Makes the 44. By November, when there's injuries, he's starting on Thanksgiving night. And I'm like, and I watched that game Thanksgiving night. And I watched him on every single play. And I'm like, how the hell is this guy playing this well when 1 year before in the college game, in college football, he was in quicksand. Well, the Eagles, and that night he made a couple of plays, and he was 1-gapping on those plays. Again, I'm not saying 1-gapping is better than 2-gapping, but some people can just play that way better. He was a guy that in his 1 year as a starter, semi-starter at Michigan State, analysis to paralysis. It said the same thing about Angelo Gross. Noah Harvey, Crouch, Van Sumeren, Gross. And at some point, like I said last year doing a podcast with Cal Halliday, at some point I stop blaming the players and start wondering about the scheme. It's a long, circuitous route to get to the point that I think that the new system, it's going to be less complicated, and Hazelton might become a good coach again down the road, and he'll learn from this and maybe be less complicated in the future. If I'm wrong about that, Scotty and his people can email me and tell me I'm full of crap and come on the show and debate me about this, and they've forgotten more about football than I'll ever know. I know that. I'm just going by what we saw on the field. Rossi is more the lines of Mike Tressel. And Narduzzi, keep it simple, know what you're doing, have it be a shorter list of things, and do it right, and do it quickly, and do it with aggressiveness and physicality. And the longer you're in the program, the longer you're with the team, the more you know it, the more that can be added to it later. They had great success at Minnesota for a few years, and then last year took a step back because they had a lot of inexperience at the safety positions and the linebacker position. So they took a step backward in that regard. And some of the D'Antonio teams would do that too when they took a step backward in experience. They'd have some fall off in terms of productivity. But the Minnesota defenses, and I said this on Spartan, I've mentioned this before also, and I'll repeat it. Some of you guys know what I'm about to say. But when Michigan State was playing Minnesota in 2022, the year after the great Peach Bowl season. Michigan State went out to Washington, got blown out. They're coming back home to play Minnesota, and I can't remember who Minnesota had already played, but I was watching them on film, and I do this article at SpartanMAG.com called "The Pre-Snap Read." By the way, I'm tardy in saying this, but give us a like on this channel. That helps a lot. Subscribe to the channel. Go to SpartanMAG.com. We've got preseason practice coverage coming up soon. $1. You can subscribe for a month. $1 for a month. You can give it a test drive. Try it. SpartanMAG.com. Underground Bunker message board. You'll love it. Now, these questions come to us from the Underground Bunker message board, which is the church of what's happening now with Michigan State sports. It is the daily narrative on Michigan State sports. Go over there, check it out. And if you're a big Michigan State fan, and you probably are if you're still watching this 45 minutes in, go to SpartanMAG.com, and you'll love it. $1 for a month as we head into training camp. We'll have full coverage and analysis over there. But over at SpartanMAG.com, I made the comment that, at SpartanMAG.com, I do something called the Pre-Snap Read, which is a game preview article in which I look at the opponent, go over game film, whatever you call it, whatever you want to call it, and talk about strengths and weaknesses and how they mesh up in for Saturday's game that coming up that weekend. It's the Pre-Snap Read is what we call it. It's pretty voluminous, pretty in-depth. Try to be comprehensive. When Michigan State was getting ready to play Minnesota, and I was watching Minnesota that week, and I didn't know much about Minnesota's defense, and I was like, the more I watched, I'm like, then their defense is nails. They're correct. They've got some nice sized guys. Not a lot of 4-star recruits, but just guys that play square to the ball, arrive in tandem, vice tackling, compression tackling, defeating blocks, leveraging the ball correctly. You know, they reminded me of some of those great Iowa defenses. Not as great as the great Iowa defenses, but similar. And they do it while staying solvent in the back. You know, it's not like they're going Joe Lee Dunn and like blitzing everybody and living by the sword and dying by the sword and giving up, blitzing here but giving up big plays there. They would create negative plays, but they always had a safety net in the back. I was just impressed. They tackled well, defeated blocks well, leveraged things correctly. And I wrote in the pre-snap read, I'm like, this defense reminds me of some of the Iowa defenses. And a lot of Michigan State fans were still drunk off the 2021 season and the preseason top 20 rankings and what happened in Washington. Okay, that's an aberration. Come back and they'll kick Minnesota around and get back on track. I was like, not so fast, my friend. And I don't do predictions on the pre-snap read because if I'm going to go 6,000 words and spend 15 hours on something, I don't want to just have the prediction be like and then you get the prediction wrong and everybody thinks that your 15 hours of work was crap and the 5,000 word article was crap. No, I'll write this stuff and I'll let the readers make their own prediction out of it. But I was leaning very heavily, like this is going to be very difficult for Michigan State. Sometimes I'll put a percentage in there, like, Michigan State. I don't remember what I wrote that day, but I got a lot of criticism from Michigan State fans that were like, "You're crazy, Comparoni. You think Minnesota's you're way overrating Minnesota. You always overrate the opponent." I'm just like, listen, man, that defense, the team is solid, and Minnesota went out there and beat Michigan State something like 35-7, and Minnesota's defense was terrific. That's the Joe Rossi defense. They were excellent in 2022. Like I said, last year they took a step backward because they weren't really a program that could just like reload with talent. They took a step back largely because of inexperience at the linebacker position. I went back and watched a lot of Joe Rossi's press conferences last year after he was hired at Michigan State. I went back and watched when they gave up a lot of points and lost to Purdue and Northwestern. I watched his press conferences, and his press conferences were really refreshing. I mean, he would talk about what went wrong, why it went wrong, what needed to be fixed, and what was going on. I thought he was great. And I'm hoping that Jonathan Smith allows coordinators to do press conferences at Michigan State. D'Antonio did, and Tucker did. Not always post-game press conferences, but with Tucker, we would get like a different assistant coach every week. We didn't necessarily get the coordinator we did not get the coordinator every single week. I hope we do now. I don't know what Jonathan Smith's philosophy on that is. I love D'Antonio's philosophy on that. Tucker came in and wanted the coordinators to speak after most games, did that for a while. And Tucker, I thought, he had a great philosophy about it. He said that when he was at Alabama, Saban did not let the assistant coaches ever get interviewed. And Tucker didn't appreciate that. He thought it was good for coaches to get interviewed and promote themselves a little bit and discuss what's going on. Promoting themselves is not at the top of the list of the reasons why. But I'm hoping that we get access to coordinators more than once every 6 weeks like we did the last couple of years. But Rossi was doing press conferences every single week at Minnesota, and I thought he was great. And I think it's great for the fans to hear what's going right, what's going wrong, what's being done to fix things, and what has been done to elevate things. I think Rossi's press conferences were really good. We've talked about it on the Underground Bunker message board. We had a thread about this a few days ago that Rossi reminds me of Narduzzi a lot. Somebody made that comparison, and I agreed. I thought that myself, but somebody made that comparison, and I agreed. He reminds me, and I love Narduzzi. Everybody knows that. And they're both like Western Pennsylvania, Eastern Ohio type of guys. Both Italian guys, both defensive players at a small school level. Similar worldview guys, the way they approach coaching young men and aggressive guys. Difference is, it's like Rossi is like the more articulate younger brother of Pat Narduzzi. And Pat, if you're watching, I'm sure you're not, but I don't mean to say you're inarticulate, but Narduzzi's great and he had all kinds of success. You can do it different types of ways, right? Izzo is kind of that gym coach type of guy. Narduzzi's a gym coach type of guy. Nothing against gym coaches. I'd like to be a gym teacher, as a matter of fact. Whereas Rossi would be like the younger brother. Rather than being a gym teacher, he's a younger brother who's the English teacher type of guy. But similar approaches to football. And I think Rossi has a future as a head coach. I think Lindgren has a future as a head coach. But anyway, Hazelton came in as $1 million assistant coach, coordinator, when not a lot of guys were getting $1 million at that point. Didn't work out. I don't close the door on Hazelton making a comeback and resurrection at some point. Rossi's a good up-and-comer with Midwestern roots. Had coached at Minnesota. He coached Brady. He recruited Brady Pretzlaff out of Gaylord. Got a commitment from him for the Gophers. But then Rossi gets hired at Michigan State, and Rossi ends up flipping Pretzlaff, 4-star recruit, the linebacker position. So I think the linebacker position and defensive coordinator as a whole, until proven otherwise, I think that's an upgrade. Again, nothing against Hazelton. Maybe he'll get things straightened out in the future. But Rossi was just flat out way better at Minnesota than Hazelton was at Michigan State. And that's an apples-to-apples comparison. So I think that's an apples-to-apples upgrade. Now, Hazelton had a really good year at Kansas State. In 2019, they upset Oklahoma. So he did some good things there as well. Had a good resume. But I think Rossi is a really good fit. And, Jonathan Smith spent a long time trying to find a defensive coordinator, or looking into defensive coordinators, interviewing them and researching them. And when they hired Rossi, I'm like, man, that makes perfect sense. Big Ten roots, knows the conference, is recruited around here, plays the type of football that Smith wants to play. And again, one of the weaknesses for Oregon State the last couple of years, I thought, was defense. I think that was kind of a weaker link. So everything they did well at Oregon State, and then you add Joe Rossi defensive component to it, it's just 2 + 2 = 4. They're just doing a lot of pragmatic, understandable equations as they build this. And Big Movie Ron Armstrong made the point. He says, as they're doing this, you can just tell that they're not skipping any steps. They're going step by step with everything. They're not trying to shortcut or skip any steps. That's his line, and I appreciate what he's saying there, and I agree with it. And I need to give him credit for that phraseology and saying they're not skipping steps. I think that's a great way to describe it. So an interesting thing is when you've got Coach Lingy, Sui Aonoa, coming in from the previous staff, Blue Adams coming in as a defensive backs coach from the previous staff, and meshing previous coaches to a new coordinator. That's going to take some ironing out there. I think that the personalities are as such that should come together okay, but there's no guarantees there. So that's something that they need to make sure takes place well. Defensive backs coaching, when you look at Blue Adams coming in, and also Demetrius Martin. Martin was at Oregon. He was considered strongly enough that Dan Lanning hired him there. And I can't even remember who the defensive backs coach was. I got to do a search here. I'm drawing a blank. Very embarrassing. Well, Mel Tucker was corners coach, right? That was a problem. That's right. So he was corners coach for 1 year, and then who they brought in? There was that Travaris Tillman came in for 1 year from Georgia Tech, and I can't even remember who they had last year. But the Mel Tucker thing, Tucker made that comment. In 2021, Michigan State in pass defense. His words was Michigan State was dead ass last in pass defense that year. Pass per yards per pass attempt was not as bad, but overall yards allowed was bad. Tucker became corners coach. That didn't work out. Then I can't remember who they hired as I'm trying to look it up right now. My first search failed. Let's see. I think I found it. Oh, Harlan Barnett. How could I forget? Jim Salgado came in as cornerbacks coach last year for 1 year, and I like Salgado came in from the NFL. Previously, had been at Syracuse and Princeton. He was enthused about getting back into college coaching, but that was then the whole cornerbacks thing was a stopgap with Travaris Tillman, then Tucker, and they moved Tillman out, put Tucker in, and with Tucker being corners coach for 1 year, that freed up a slot on the coaching staff for Brandon Jordan to come in as pass rush coach, which showed some promise early on, but then that kind of fizzled out. Tucker at corner, that fizzled out. Salgado for 1 year, Tillman for 1 year, Tucker for 1 year. So these corners had three different coaches. So your defensive linemen have had three different coaches, now 4 in 4 years, and your cornerbacks coaches have had 4 different corners coaches in 4 years. Not ideal. You need some stability there. It'll take some time to get that going. Barnett was safeties coach, and great assistant coach for a number of years at Michigan State, former coordinator. So he was definitely definitely a venerable, respectable coach. So Barnett was great. I'm not sure it all meshed together. I'm not sure Barnett believed in the system. And when he became head coach, they tried to change some things here and there, but you can't make wholesale changes 2 games into a season. And it came out that I think it was in 2022, midway through the year, Michigan State brought in an analyst from Troy State. I forget his name. Was it Troy State? Mooby told me about that, and it was kind of off the record there for a while, and then it came out later. But bringing in an analyst midway through the year, the confidence in Hazelton, I'm not sure was that great. They kept Hazelton around for another year. And then Barnett, Barnett insinuated when he was interim head coach that there were some things on defense that he would do differently, but you can't change in the midstream like that. So Barnett was an excellent safeties coach. Everybody knows that. Blue Adams, an excellent safeties coach, and Demetrius Martin, highly respected on the West Coast. So they just need stability. They need to get Martin in there long-term, coaching corners, and Martin has been part of coaching staffs in the past that have come in, I think, at Colorado after Tucker was there, and had a lot of work to do. So he's got a lot of work to do here also, but they need stability. They need Coach Lange there long-term, need Martin or somebody long-term at corners so that they can get out of this cycle of Travaris Tillman, Tucker, Salgado changing cornerbacks coaches every year. So just year one, I would expect, Salgado was a good assistant coach coming from the NFL, right? He was good, and I thought he was good and loud and boisterous and had a lot of energy in practice and everything. But how does it all meld into the system? Did he meld into? I haven't heard Salgado early on when he's at Michigan State. There were just some things that he thought were unsound, So I'm not sure everybody was all in there. So you need everybody all in the Rossi system, which I think could and should happen. And then you need Coach Lange at defensive line coach long term. You need Demetrius Martin at cornerbacks coach long term, and Blue Adams long term. And then you build as you go. So went over pretty much every person on the staff. And when you're taking over for a program that went 3-9 or whatever Michigan State was, 4-8, had a great year 2 years ago, but it's not hard to imagine some upgrades at a lot of those positions. So that's a long answer to question number one. And I might even just shut off the VCast right there. My other 2 questions, one was about, I'll just save those other 2 questions for another time. So that's some deep football stuff. And, maybe we come back on Monday and do another one. I appreciate, it looks like we've got like 60 live viewers or something like that on a Saturday afternoon, which is not easy to do, but I appreciate everybody coming in and checking us out. it was six weeks till the start of college football season. 6 weeks from yesterday. Yesterday being Friday. So counting down toward Big Ten Media Days in Indianapolis in a couple of days. On Tuesday, Jonathan Smith will be there. Dylan Tatum will be there. Jack Velling. And who's the other one? I forget. Anyway, I got it at the top here. Let's see. It's Velling, Tatum. Oh, Nathan Carter, underrated running back. Got that coverage coming up heading into August camp coverage. Wall-to-wall coverage at SpartanMAG.com, coverage and commentary at the Underground Bunker message board. If you're a big Michigan State fan and you're digging this podcast, you got to become a subscriber. $1 for a month. You'll love it. Give us a like to the channel right now. In the meantime, subscribe to this channel. That helps us a lot. Helps us get the Spartan Mag live and our videos out to Michigan State fans because it'll come up on their feed when they do Michigan State searches. And if you give us a thumbs up, that helps a lot. We appreciate that. Over in the comments area, got Thomas Kohlberg coming in, Austin Wolf coming in. Brian Bose, he says, got a wedding reception at Spartan Stadium tonight. Can't wait to be back. Wedding reception at Spartan Stadium. Big time. Is Sparty going to be there? For a price, you can have Sparty come to your wedding reception, I think. Todd H. says, do you think we can shock everyone and have a 9 or 10 win season counting the bowl game? That would be a shock. I doubt it. 9 or 10. I doubt it. Some players would have to play like we don't know they can. So starting 5, Thomas Kohlberg at the point. Austin Wolf shooting like Joe Wolf. From the wing, Brian Bose. He sounds like a banger. Putting him in the 4. Todd H. He's the other wing. Steve S. is down low. Can I have a guy named Steve S. down low? No, Steve S. has to be. I got him in the wing. That's Steve Smith. It's not the real Steve Smith, but we got him in the wing. So that moves Austin Wolf. That moves Bose to the 5, and now Todd H is the 4. Nick Harrington says, Comp, I'm back. Good to have Nick Harrington back. Nick with the super chat. We appreciate that all the time for sure. Appreciate the heck out of that. Let me see if I can find that. Where are we at here? I wasn't ready for that. Caught me by surprise. Hold on. Got to find my way around this thing. Hold on. But good to have Nick Harrington back. I don't know where you were, Nick Harrington, but nice to have you. Let's see what is going on here. I'm trying to find my dashboard. There it is. Right there, Nick Harrington. Thank you. Thanks a lot to Nick Harrington. Really appreciate your support there. That's on the super chat. We appreciate that in the tip jar. Thank you. He says, ready for some MSU football and hockey this fall. Behind Carter, who do you think will land the number 2 spot? Talking about a running back? I think Kayron Adams, bringing him in from UMass. Film looks good. We're doing a depth chart series. I got to do the running backs coach probably today. But Kayron Adams, I would imagine, and they moved, Mangum. They moved Jaron Mangum off. He ends up at Minnesota. They moved, they didn't retain Jalen Berger. So right away, Kayron Adams, we did not see him in the spring. We did see Brandon Tullis coming in as a true freshman, and Tullis had more work than Jalen Berger did in the spring showcase, and Jaron Mangum did not play in the spring showcase, which was a foreshadowing that he was going to be moving on. We've not seen Mekhi Frazier yet. I frankly was more impressed with Mekhi Frazier's high school film than Brandon Tullis. They're both Texas kids. I thought Frazier was a little more direct, a little more decisive, a little more physical. But Tullis came in and looked like a bona fide college football player right now at 18 years old as a teenager. So I think Tullis could be the guy, but they bring in Kayron Adams in for a reason from UMass, 1,000-yard rusher. So I'm guessing it's Carter and Adams, 1 and 2 at the running back. So my guess would be Adams coming in from the transfer portal. Reed is now at South Alabama. They're talking about Ephraim Reed. Thank you very much. And I think he'll be in the SEC at some point soon. Brian Bose says Lindgren's rise was crazy to me, albeit at Northern Arizona. He went from graduate assistant to offensive coordinator in 3 years. Yeah, Lindgren impresses me, and I think he's going to impress you when you hear him talk about football. And just, he's a West Coast quarterback. He's got a presence about him. But they've got like a little bit of it's like a revamped, it's like combination West Coast Rust Belt type of thing. But West Coast is Rust Belt a little bit. It's physicality, it's zone blocking, it's creating vacuums and hitting dead spots. and they get you leaning one way and hit you the other way. George Page says, "Hi, comp. Is that a real background, Lake Michigan?" No, that's Lake Erie, the most underrated of the Great Lakes, and we are on the northern shore of Lake Erie. You see a couple Canadian flags, one right there, and one over there. And if you look closely, that one right there has a Michigan State flag underneath it. My brother-in-law put that up, so it's family cottage. Uh, you may have seen my father-in-law. As a matter of fact, so I married a Canadian, so we're over here quite a bit, and I've got a nephew over there and a couple guys next door. They're catching walleye off the dock over there. Um, yeah, not a green screen. Um, Nickel into UAB, thank you. How do you think our offensive line and defensive line will do this season? I'm off planet asks. Well, offensive line, you got to subscribe to SpartanMAG.com. We've got a depth chart preview series that we've been running, and we wrote about each offensive line position over the last couple of weeks. Left tackle, left guard, center, all 5 positions. Went through the depth chart and gave the latest on each of those positions. So it would take me another hour to go over that, but go over there, become a subscriber for $1 for a month, and you can read that over there. Defensive line's coming up here in the coming weeks. Also, thank you, Colbert Cat Salgado. I finally got that, but I got that when I did the search. But I appreciate everybody coming in and checking us out. We'll look to see if we can have another one real soon. Appreciate the comments. Appreciate Nick Harrington. And go over to SpartanMAG.com, become a subscriber. Love to have you over there. Everybody take care, and we will see you next time. Be good. Thank you.